Hello and welcome to the latest Madaxeman.com Army List ADLG podcast, in which I'm joined by Richard and Dave, and we dive into a matched pair of historical armies this time in another new experiment for this format. This time we're looking at the 100 Years' War, an army in which the English and French effectively came to be as nations, but really it's about Crecy, it's about Agincourt, it's about Poitiers, and it's about a load of other smaller battles that weren't recorded, and it's about English longbowmen and French chivalry. Two famous lists, two maybe not so popular lists, want they're on the table, but we're going to hopefully show you how. So sit back and enjoy the podcast.
This means war.
Well, welcome to yet another list special from Madaxeman.com. I'm joined here as usual for these list specials by Richard and Dave. Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. You almost waved there, Richard. That doesn't really work podcast-wise, but we're getting better at this. We're struggling towards it. It's all good. And in our trot through the popular but underachieving maybe lists of the world or lists of the ADLG Army List book or booklet section. This time we're actually looking at two lists in parallel, which are something of a matched pair and actually mark quite an important part in military history and an important part in political history in the structure of Europe. And that's really the period of the 100 Years' War, and more specifically the English list and the French list. It's a legendary war. It's got the great battles of Crecy and Poitiers and Agincourt. It's got Joan of Arc. It's got the move from a sort of yeoman soldiery and chivalry into more professional armies. It's got the foundation of two countries, really. But from a wargaming point of view, it's got longbowmen, and they're usually so cool that most sets of rules make up a special troop type for them. And I think that's kind of one of the interesting questions as well. But other than that, it is by definition 100 years, or more than 100 years if you look at the date line, and it is famous for, certainly from the English side, 3 battles, but given I believe the French ended up winning, I suspect there's some other battles that the French won, the English lost that we don't get taught so much about over here. But and then there's kind of peripheral people around the edges. There's the Low Countries, there's the Burgundians, there's the Scots as well, who all kind of drift in and out and are secondary characters on this particular stage, and that is all set against that backdrop of military evolution. But I don't know, sort of over to you guys. What, looking into these lists, is this a period that you were surprised about how much depth there was in it? Was it one that you knew quite a bit before about, or what have you been surprised about digging into the background of these lists?
I think one of the interesting, just sort of looking at the history, it's quite interesting to see, as you said, it's the real crystallization perhaps of English and French nationalism and the shift from essentially feudal armies to professional paid armies for the first time in 1,000 years. So that's quite a shift. As you say, the rise of infantry versus the knights that had dominated in the sort of 11th to 13th centuries, both the longbowmen and by the end of the period, the rise of pikemen is beginning to come through, both in the Low Countries, Switzerland, and to a degree Germany. So it does mark some very significant social, national, and military changes. And as always, war forces that. But also we have to remember that in the middle of the war, we had a catastrophic plague in the form of the Black Death, which also, I think, had some fairly major impacts on society and the outcome of the war.
Yeah, and I think picking out one thing from that, the longbow, which I mentioned in my preamble, in an era that, if you go back, you can see how the knight evolves from chivalry and they're just kind of good and effective. But before that, the Norman period and the early part of the medieval period, it seemed to be knights versus lines of slightly subpar spear people, and then the longbow kind of appears as the uber weapon to change it. Now, to what extent, we all have these stories of skeletons from the Mary Rose with a huge one of their arms much bigger than the other and things like that coming up. So how did this weapon seemingly sort of spring from nowhere and then become the preeminent weapon, and then I guess to an extent fade away to some degree after this? Where did it just come from to become a completely almost new weapon class that works? Well, certainly in wargaming terms, a new weapon class.
So it emerges in Wales, particularly South Wales, from what we can see, and it's adopted by the Anglo-Norman barons in that area, see its benefit and begin to use it. So it's used in the Clare's invasion of Ireland, for example, and it's particularly picked up by Edward I, who faces it when he's facing the Welsh, but then uses it in his armies against the Scots. And his reign is really a reign of transition. And you see it in the sort of the late feudal English lists, where you still have a lot of mounted knights, but you're using them with longbow. And then the shift in the sort of 1320s is that armor tends to shift from essentially chainmail with a bit of plate reinforcing to you begin to see the emergence of full plate mail, and the English start to fight predominantly on foot. The English knights and men-at-arms start to fight on foot. And we see the emergence then of the English military system that persists for the next 100 or so years and is eventually copied by the Scots, and elements of it are adopted by the French. So one of their tactics against the longbow is to dismount, and the rules reflect that, a foot knight is much more resistant to longbow fire than a mounted heavy knight. And as long as it's in open country, the foot knight will normally beat the longbowman. But in broken ground, and the English were usually fortunate or careful enough to have the battlefields include muddy fields or other broken ground, the knight's too slow and the firepower tends to overwhelm them. Not necessarily directly, but what the longbow tends to do historically is it pushes the knights into column, and they then head for the English men-at-arms on fairly equal terms, but the flanks of those columns are then chipped away at by the longbow, eventually leading to French exhaustion and collapse. We see that in a number of the battles.
I suppose it's an interesting question in terms of, you talk about Edward adopting this and rolling it out, and then at some point by, is it Shakespearean times, everybody's training to be a longbowman instead of playing football or something slightly surreal like that.
There are laws passed to that effect. And I think what that also, you mentioned Shakespeare, it's quite interesting. We see through time, in the early part of the war, you might have one or two men-at-arms for each longbowman, and a lot of actual knights are still fighting in the armies of Edward III. By the time we get to Henry V and later, we're seeing the ratio shift to maybe one man-at-arms to 4, and later even 8 longbowmen. So a real shift, and that's partly expense. The knights, I think, were paid 3 or 4 times what the longbowmen were paid. We get more men-at-arms who were paid as squires at half the rate of a knight. And the actual term for archers in the payroll is often valet, servant. So perhaps that also shows us, the evolution of some of the longbowmen were coming from the personal retinue of the knights. But I think because of that, because of the cost, we see a much greater adoption of these yeomen, and that's paralleled by the rise in Flanders of the pikemen. And so a real shift in pride. So it's the quote unquote lower orders who are doing a lot of the fighting. And so their sense of pride, and I think that's partly why they're able to resist the mounted knights better is that they have confidence in themselves and so are more steadfast. The reason a lot of the earlier medieval spear isn't so good is that when threatened by charging knights, the sheer rumble of the ground and their lack of confidence means they often actually broke before contact. Whereas we see this shift in psychology as part of the broader social changes. And that's also connected to the Black Death because that increases the wages of the poor.
Right, just by stripping out a number of people from the landscape.
By the competition, yes. So lords everyone had to pay more to get work done.
Right, okay. Because I think it's... Sorry, Dave, you were chipping about the Black Death?
No, the Black Death ends serfdom to some extent. You get the lack of serfs. That changes the whole social order of the countries. I think that's very true. I think Richard's covered that very completely. You've got two different systems creating in parallel, haven't you? You've got the English taking the longbow, the Scots take up the spear, the pike as well as the Low Countries, and these are peasant weapons. And you're moving.
What was not happening then in France for them to still stay much more a mounted nobility? Was that cultural? Was that Black Death related thing? It didn't touch France quite as hard as it did here, because it's certainly the textbook view of these battles is the English trained peasant soldiery with their longbows raining down death on posh French knights who were too posh to get off their horses initially. Were they just behind on it? Was it the longbow? It just was lucky that it was in Wales, or was there a cultural shift that was going on as well?
I'll chip in on that there was this, from what I know from what I did from medieval, there was a big notion of chivalry in France, greater than in England probably. So their militarism was based around the concept of chivalry. So their fighting was done by the knights, and I just think they had more knights to call on. And the English army, which I think we said this earlier, that you're talking at the beginning of this, you're talking about a civil war between two French states, in effect, going to war, which is the English knights and the English aristocracy spoke French. And they were fighting over what the English nobility saw as their rights to have land in France. So what begins as a civil war gradually changes, probably, as you say, through the Black Death to some extent, and through the change of warfare. And these are raids conducted by semi-professional army. Crecy, there may be a force in the English that just before Crecy, they're almost starving to death in northern France. They're trying to march across the landscape to escape the French army. And they've lost their horses, they've lost a lot of their equipment, and they're forced back on this new method. And they kind of discover this new method of way of warfare by accident.
Yeah, because I think that's another interesting point. It's 100 or it's 120 years or so, and we know of these three battles, and as I'm sure there are what famous battles if we'd gone to school in France about when the French win at the end. But there's only three of these set piece battles in this 100 Years' War that are the famous three. But the lists then, I guess, do you feel these lists are written for those three battles, or do they cover all of these presumably smaller raiding actions and great marches around France by bands of English people pillaging the countryside? Do you think the lists are geared just towards the three battles, or do they actually work at a much smaller scale to recreate some of these other mixed arms forces?
I think they're more aimed at the large battles. I mean, ADLG is a large battle set. It isn't trying to model those smaller wars. And a lot of those wars you say were raids and sieges. That's where a lot of medieval battle strategy war strategy would revolve on, is the taking of cities, the control of provinces. I do think, and again, there's if you were actually trying to recreate one of the specific battles, you could do it from the lists. But as I've mentioned earlier, probably you have a bit too much freedom in the list. Earlier phases, the ratios maybe should be different to later. But at the end of the day, the list writer, while they're trying to capture the essence of the period, has also got to give, when you've only got 20 to 30 units. You've got to allow some freedom in order to put down a playable force. So I think the lists are good, but you would want to tweak them a bit if you were actually, trying to do the order of battle for a specific event that's well documented.
So maybe then it's one of those lists like those couple of early Roman ones where it could almost do with an advisory note to say, if you want to recreate the English army of Crecy, Poitiers, Agincourt, you should have a ratio of 2-1, 4-1, something like that, possibly. But the trouble that's got everybody into with the confusion on those early Roman lists, maybe it's best it's left off, really. Otherwise, we'd all be answering questions online about it from people for years. Well,
it has to be when it's advisory or informational. It needs to be clearly marked as that rather than prescriptive, because otherwise,
I think in the case of those Roman lists, maybe it just needs to be better translated. Because I understand the French list actually says this is advisory.
Okay,
it was just a translation error. Okay, well, look, as we're on talking on the lists, what we've decided to do this week is to really look at, we've chipped in with an English list each and a French list each to cover this almost a matched pair of armies. And let's start with Dave. I think we've got your English list, which I'll just pop up on screen here now. And this is an English list in 1340. There's obviously a reason for choosing that specific date. It's the Low Countries. You snuck in a Low Countries ally. Now, I guess talk us through how this list works and remind us why the Low Countries were involved as well, I guess.
I'll leave Richard to explain the Low Countries participation. What I've tried to do with this list is the first mission was to get a large enough army. I mean, there's some very expensive troop types in foot knights and longbowmen. I've managed to get 23 into the army, which I think is
that's
quite
big. That's very big for a late medieval army, definitely.
Yeah, and the main way of doing that was to use the Low Countries ally because you've got a few troops. But overall, you've got three commands. I've tried to go for balance here. I've got one command which has got a good amount of medium foot, light foot to hold terrain. One command which has got a knight component to fight in the open and support the pike. And the pike, the Low Country ally, which will go chomping down the centre of the table, we hope. Obviously, because it's allied, you want it in the centre to give it more chance of activating if it throws a 1. And so the Low Countries ally list, part of the component is, as I say, it's trying to be quite cheap. So I've got 4 pikemen mediocre who've got 2
great value troop type, great value troop type. Yeah.
I mean, the Scots army in this period is a fantastic list. That's a shocker, that is. Because they're mediocre, you need the 2 lightfoot bowmen to protect them. I'd love to have more in actual fact, but I think that's a difficulty. They're there just to protect those guys from shooting.
Yeah.
You've got to have a foot knight in that Low Country ally, so I've made him the general. So I guess he'll sit in the centre of that group. A foot knight general is a very good piece. He's a very, very powerful piece. I mean, he will probably be the one who does the damage in there. I fought a battle with Tommy Warden from Ireland once, and I think I had to hit a foot knight general from all 4 sides before I killed it. So, really difficult. So that's the centre of the army. Command 1 has got the 4 longbow, and it's also got 2 B-Day light infantry javelin elite. So I almost hope that I might want to get a piece of rough, difficult terrain there. Shove those 2 B-Days, bidettes in there to hold that piece of difficult terrain. I mean, light infantry, javelin with being elite is a very, very powerful force. You know, they will hold up a piece of difficult going, if not hold it entirely. I probably tend to try, you know, if I have a field, I tend to put the 4 longbowmen together in a field, maybe.
Four is a big number, because in your, you know, almost every other list you've coughed up so far for here, you've put 2 bowmen in together, but here you've gone 4. Is there a magic number with 2 or 3 or 4? Is 4 much better than 3? Yeah, does the shooting scale up somehow, do you feel?
I think shooting becomes very, very powerful. I tend to use 2 bowmen to support cavalry, support knights and things like that, you know, to add to shoot their way in. You know, if there's a piece of terrain of the right, I mean, if you had a hill with a field on it, you are not going to shift 4 longbowmen off that hill. And
not elite longbowmen anyway. Yeah,
you're going to find it difficult to shift them out of the field. It's that massive amount of firing, the fact that you can slightly edge them, so 2 longbowmen shoot at one piece. You're going to cause hits. I think you're going to get 3 hits out of 4 most rounds with that lot. And, you know, you get 2 to 3 shots as any troop type comes in towards you. There's not very many medium infantry in this period. So you're not going to get medium infantry. You know, even if medium infantry spear came at you, you're going to shred them with bow fire to make it an evens fight, and you're elite.
Yeah, I suppose 4 is a very wide unit. Most people are going to be putting, if you've got medium foot, they're struggling to put 2 or 3 together, really, aren't they? So you are going to be doubling up on the shooting on anything coming at you. And then the rest of that command.
Then you've got 4 foot knights, including another knight general, 3 foot knight halberdier, who's damn good. The halberdier can support the longbowmen, but you're going to be putting those foot knights down the centre of the table in support of the pikemen. So you're going to be trying to get, you know, those.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got 4 pikemen and the foot knight with the Low Countries. Then you've got another 4 foot knights and halberdiers. So you're up to 9 wide of proper combat stuff, plus the 4 longbowmen who are winning any terrain battle, kind of almost in the Middle Ages in a way, unless they come up against those Swiss halberdiers. But so that's actually giving you quite a lot of frontage with this thing. So what about your 3rd command then? That's much more textbook.
You need something which is, I mean, I'm thinking that's the foot knight's first command is one wing. This is the other wing. It's going to go down the centre of the table. Hopefully the pike are going to support those 3 knights impetuous. And
do they dismount in this period? I'm trying to think.
Who, what, where?
Can those impetuous knights dismount, I imagine, as well, if need be?
I don't think they're allowed to. They're not given the option. I mean, if they're facing some sort of stake that can dismount, you know, that would be great option if you're facing that. And I've done my regular trick there. I've got a longbowman and a crossbowman to support the knights, work on the outside, possibly in assistance with a medium cavalry impact. That medium cavalry impact can sit behind the bowmen and threaten anything which comes towards them. But the idea there is that the knights included general and the 3 knights impetuous go forward, and you want to bring those crossbow and the longbow out past them on the wing to start shooting them in and trying to get into the flanks of things. I think it's quite a flexible army. I think there's a lot going in its favour, particularly the numbers. I think that there's definitely an art. I mean, I've got 3 included generals just to try and get myself up to 23. There's an argument.
Yeah, and they're all ordinary as well, aren't they? Which is remarkably notable, especially one with heavy knights impetuous. That's quite committed.
I figure on being the defender here, and you know, with an allied pike mediocre ally, you want to make sure he's moving before anything. And if you're defending, you get an extra piece of terrain, which you hope will help out as well.
Yeah, because I suppose unless you're fighting in period, you're not going to be seeing that many other longbowmen. So, Richard, what's your thoughts on this one?
So I think it like every list, pluses and minuses. So the pluses are the raw number of troops, and a lot of very useful troops, a strong fighting line. Disadvantages, as we've said, having all the generals as ordinary means, and having no light horse means each of the commands has to stay quite tightly grouped. It's very easy if the general's on one end of the line, it's very easy for the other end to be out of command range if you want to move it as an individual unit rather than as part of the group. Two of the commands are potentially unreliable, which, as Dave says, if you're on the defensive, isn't the end of the world. But it does mean that there's perhaps a danger that the opponent could try and screen off one or two of the commands and concentrate on the remaining part. But each bit is strong. So even if they do that, they're not going to have an easy job. And the chances are that they will activate at least one of the commands, if it is unreliable, by closing in. So, you know, I think it would be fun to play. But I think it would be, you'd have to practice with it a few times, or you have to be comfortable fighting with a low amount of command and control. And if they become committed to combat, potentially no command and control. So you are relying on the fighting qualities of the army. So it's about to be successful with it, it's about keeping the tactics simple, which I think suits this kind of army, because it can stand and shoot, or it can charge in.
I don't think it doesn't want to fight any mounted bow armies, but then it's got the longbow. I mean, there's an argument you could drop one of the longbows from the first command, and that will give you 11 points to bring, you know, commanders up to competent, stop them being included or unreliable. That's one argument. But then it is what it does on the tin. It's this period. I've designed it to be representative. So go for it.
No, I think it's a good version of that period. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose if you were just tweaking it, if you swapped out one of those 4 longbowmen for a second crossbowman, you'd save yourself 4 points, which would then either make one of your generals competent or not included. Because just looking at that, I think a spectacular total points cost for your generals of -15. I think that's possibly the lowest it's possible to get, isn't it? I don't think you can do more than that.
No,
-15.
But I mean, the other argument I would have, if you're going to use somewhere to drop a base, you might want to be looking at raising those 4 pikemen from mediocre to ordinary and make it even tougher in a fight. You know, because the Low Countries ally don't have to be mediocre; they can be ordinary. I think they're allowed 4 or something like that. Whether that actually works in terms of the ally, I'm not sure. But there's
if you're allowed 4, you'd be allowed 2, wouldn't you? You could bump 2 of them up to mediocre. And
you could probably end up
one the longbowman for another crossbowman.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
so just a quick comment on the history. The reason the Low Countries became involved is that the English had a huge bit of their export trade was selling wool to the Flanders cities for them to make into cloth, and the whole point of the war was who should be the King of France. You know, did Edward III have a better claim through his mother, or the French nobles wanted what they would regard as a truly French king? So the half-brother of the Count of Flanders got the agreement of Edward III to support him as the true count. He swore homage to him, and a number of the Flemish cities, particularly Ghent and I think Bruges, then used that as an opportunity to legitimately rebel, because they could claim they were supporting the true king and the true count. Hence why in this early part of the war, those cities provide allied troops to the army. And often the English armies were marching between sort of Normandy and Flanders through northern France. Quite a few of the campaigns do that.
Okay, so is this a one of those allies that was theoretically possible, or is there record of Low Countries citizens participating in some of these combats? I don't know whether they didn't fight in any of the big battles, but certainly they were in arms in support of the English. Okay.
I'm not sure that they ever fought together, but possibly an army like this, which isn't perhaps a royal English army, but represents some English nobles with some Flemish troops, is a very plausible army for 1340.
I think APLP lists are pretty accurate. I think there must have been at least one occasion when the English had some Low Country in there, as they wouldn't put it in there.
Yeah, and it's certainly not the king unless he's letting himself be an ordinary included general at -3 points. That's not really doing your world of chivalry very, very well, is it? No. Okay. All right. Well, look, that's the first list done.
This means war.
So look, that's one English list in 1340, and if we move on, I think looking at it, Richard, I think one of your lists is also 1340. So
yeah.
If I can try and throw that one up on screen, let's just get the screen share working properly, and it's 1340. Here we go. So you've got 22, another good number because it's north of 20 for this one. You've also got 0 initiative, but you've really gone big with a competent general on this one. You've got the Germans, the medieval Germans, and a 9, a 5, and an 8. So talk us through this. Which one would you see going down first, or which command do you want to talk about in which order for this one?
Well, sort of working through it, I think probably because the English basically is all foot, I went for the German to give me a mounted impact strike command. So the two English commands, the smaller one first is 3 heavy foot, one of which is included elite knight general, and 2 heavy spearmen, supported by 2 longbowmen. So I would probably deploy that in the center with the 2 longbowmen between that command and the German command.
All right, so they can support shoot them knights.
They can provide support shooting to the Germans. The idea of taking the spearmen is to just make it tougher against the French mounted. So I think that combination, the spearmen will make the French knights a little more hesitant about just ploughing in. If they do, it increases the survivability of the line and perhaps gives the English foot general a chance to really grind in on its opponent, assuming he survives the first round. The other English command then, I would be, depending on the terrain, it has a number of longbowmen with a crossbowman just to sort of pad out the shooting a bit. And if there was a flank field, they would go into that. Otherwise, I would probably have them providing the link to command 2, or I might run all the heavy foot together. It depends on the situation. But what you've got there is, a little bit of rubbish to pad it out, but it just means, with the medium swordsman, you've got 4 troops plus a light infantry javelin that can go into rough. That light infantry might just turn the odds. And the idea of the hobelar is probably just to hang around behind the line and plug a hole if one appears. But if the tactical opportunity presents itself, it can swing wide and threaten a flank.
Yeah, actually, just looking at those brigands, that medium swordsman mediocre, it's a pretty dreadful troop type. But in this micro period, it's not like the French get loads of good terrain troops either, is it? That's kind of as good as anything that's going to find in there, really.
Well, I've often played Hubert he often uses the 100 Years' War French, and he uses this troop type effectively because it's not very good, but when it's facing nothing, or it's just facing a light infantry in the rough, it can be quite potent and it can threaten a flank. And the big thing is, because everything often costs 8, 11, 14 points, there it is at 5. it can really help you grow the army into the low 20s instead of having an army of 19.
Yeah, just by existing, it makes the rest of the stuff more survivable, because the army's going to last longer, and nothing's going to come in there and get it, is it?
Exactly. Okay. The Germans themselves then, I think I've picked up on our now sort of fairly standard idea of having some spearmen to support mounted. What I like about this combination is that I would, rather than having the knights on the outside, I'd probably have the crossbowmen on the outside, then the spearmen, then the knights, and then the longbow of command too. So you've now got quite a nice mixed line with quite a bit of shooting, some sort of durability with the heavy spearmen, and some punch with the impact knights. So all in all, quite a mixture of troop types, a reasonable size. I'm not in love with it, but out of what I think is a very challenging list, I feel this is something that I could put down against any opponent and have a chance.
Yeah, that German command with a couple of crossbowmen, a couple of spearmen, 3 heavy knight impacts and a mounted crossbow, that is a proper little all arms command, isn't it? Really,
yeah,
that does do quite a lot. And then your final command is just the textbook. Well, actually, it's more spearmen as well. You've gone 6 spearmen in the army, so it is designed to fight the French when they're all on horses, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. The spearmen hold them off, and it's really against anybody. The spearmen are there to hold people off and to hang on while the longbow and the knights do the damage. Okay,
and then you've got you've gone for the minimum number of archers as well. The English archers, the 4. You've padded them out with some crossbowmen. The Germans obviously have to have crossbowmen as well instead of the longbow. Were you tempted to, at any point, to say, is it because the longbow are too expensive? Are they not good enough? Do they not? What do they not do, given they are the troop type for this army?
Well, to me, it's the spirit of the period. I think at this period, the English weren't using that many longbow. That was much more later on. So I thought, well, I'll be in the spirit, and I think they are expensive, and I wanted those impact knights. So I think if you go for the impact knights, if you change a couple of spearmen at 8 to elite longbow at 11, I mean, if you could take ordinary longbow at 9, I'd have a few more. But with the choice being 11 or nothing, I think you've either got to base your army on them or take the minimum, in my view.
Okay, Dave, what's your thought looking at this one?
I think it's very similar to the list that I've done in the first tranche, with the going for size. We both got included generals, and the difference is 1 allied, but we're trying to save 9 points with command there. I think Richard's right. I think the heavy knight, the German ally with the heavy knight impact, gives you a bit more control, and I do like the idea of the spear. Although the spear are slightly at risk if they're facing a foot knight, because the foot knight will chop his
slightly.
I think it's kind of similar. It's balanced, and you've got a bit of mounted, you've got bowmen on the outsides. It's the balance of it that's the attraction there.
Yeah. And what about the the stakes? Oh no, stakes is from 1415, so it doesn't quite fit in this one as a discussion anyway. But
they just add more to the cost of a very expensive troop type.
In fact, maybe even as a generic point, stakes, they give the enemy the opportunity to dismount.
Yeah,
which sort of then neutralizes the longbowman, but could force the enemy to dismount and lose maneuverability. What's your 2 views on stakes? Are they worthwhile, or is it always too much and too little tactical flexibility?
I think if you go for a lot of longbowmen, so you don't have the heavy foot to protect them, then I think they're worth taking. Because even if your opponent dismounts, he's now a heavy foot, but with only 3 cohesion. And if the longbowman can put a wound on the foot knight, and they still have a reasonable chance of doing that because the foot knights are only advancing at 2, so you should get 3, maybe 4 shots at them. If you can put a wound on them at contact, you're 0 all.
Yep.
And
True.
you know, the longbowmen are elite, so and it really, if it's in an open competition, what it helps hold off is the enemy mounted archers and things like that. So to me, it's a choice. If you're going for 8 or more, I would go, and you're going a longbow dominated army, I would take the chance and take them, because not everybody brings dismounts. If you're going the minimum and you're relying on the heavy foot to protect them, which is a kind of earlier type army, then I wouldn't. You can't take them, but I wouldn't take them.
I completely agree. I think if you're going long, big on the longbows, they're worthwhile. I wouldn't bother. I've played with both versions with using French ordnance and things. I think they just tend to make you too static. You've got to keep the longbow close to something else to protect them, and just use their shooting and make them dance if necessary, or just accept that they can get run down at some point.
Is some of that because in this army it's an all or nothing option, so you've got to pay the points to give everybody stakes, or if you could pick and choose and give some units stakes or not, would maybe you think about it differently? Is part of that thinking because it's all or nothing?
I think there's the interesting thing with this army is there's an assumption that it's a bit of a static, straightforward, but the way to play with it is to combine troops. Here Richard in this list has combined the heavy spear with the foot knights and the bowmen. So if you can go forward with a couple of bowmen and foots, a strong group of foots, that you're shooting in the foots, or you can go very wide with a lot of archers and use create a huge amount of firepower. So you can evolve and maneuver this army around. By saying that, both of us have got 3 two ordinary generals and no maneuverability whatsoever.
Yeah,
there is an opportunity to revolve some troops, move forward, shift one, bring the archers around the back. There's some interesting ways you can play this army.
Yeah, I guess those 3 big battles, those sort of static defensive battles, take so much of everybody's attention that I think the point you made earlier on, Dave, that a lot of these were sort of much smaller raiding actions, and there's a lot of small battles in the 100 Years' War that this is actually representing, where they would have been much more mobile or whatever. And the fact that the French volunteered to charge across the marsh in the rain into a hail of longbows 3 times, it was very gracious of them, but shouldn't necessarily detract or mean that all of the other battles were kind of swept out of the way. Okay.
This means war.
Well, look, let's move on and look at the third and final English list, which is one that I've conjured together. This one's a bit later. It's a 14-15 list, and I've gone with let's use the toys, let's use the longbowmen, let's use the stakes if you're going to have them. If you've got the option of doing it, let's throw that out there and try and make this longbow first list. And I think this is, I suppose, the question with this one is sort of the question I've just asked. Really, is this an army that is for doing those big 3 battles and relies on some degree of participation from the enemy in your plan, or how viable does it stand? But what I've gone here is that much smaller, that kind of the lowest limit to which you can probably sensibly do a medieval army, a 19. It's a 9, a 5, and a 5. Competent and 2 ordinaries. Again, I've gone down the included route for a couple of generals and gone with knights on foot as well. But this is just all about getting the best quality stuff that you can, really, and trying to get the enemy to commit to attack it, and relying on the sheer volume of shooting to see if that works. So my big command, really, which is sort of probably ends up kind of central, but it's got the ability to go into terrain. I think with this one, you're trying to scatter terrain all over the table and have lots of patches of terrain to cause maybe a more one-dimensional enemy army, little challenges of how do I deal with that spot there, or that bit of rough, or that plantation, or whatever that might be in the middle. You really want bits and pieces in the middle to disrupt a big solid line coming at you. So the first command, the big one, the 9, you've got the dismounted elite foot knight there. That's a solid, you can't get better than that. A spearman as well with armor to sit next to them. I think there's you can probably argue the toss on armor when you're fighting potentially some heavily armored knights, but for the extra point, there's only so much extra you can do with it. 3 elite longbowmen with stakes. They can operate with the foot, or the heavy foot, or they can operate on their own. And actually, you stick them out on a wing, and they drop the stakes. It is driving off anybody else's cavalry. There's a crossbowman who sits with them, who can support their shooting, and in theory might be vulnerable, but next to 3 of those longbowmen, that should be enough to scare them off. I again pad it out with the medium swordsman brigand, taking that same theory that it's mediocre, it's not great, but against nothing, it's pretty good. And a light infantry javelinman to dance around and do a bit of screening, and again that medium cavalry impact. It's quite a going into a flank. I'm a big fan of medium cavalry. In fact, I use a lot of Arab armies with the mediocre ones. Anything that medium cavalry can't take on frontally, you're not taking on frontally. But there's a lot in this command to occupy the enemy. Do they look at the foot knights, the spearmen, the longbowmen? They're dealing with shooting. There's a little bit of stuff in terrain with the medium swordsman. That medium cavalry can kind of sneak around, and hopefully the enemy forgets it's there, and then it pops up by moving a lot faster than everything else. And it also gives you quite a good edge if you do come up against anybody's medium foot who are unwise enough to venture into the open, and trying to chase down your longbowmen. So it's a nice little counterpunch to that. The second command is just kind of a textbook. This is 4 longbowmen with stakes and a foot knight included general. He gives it resilience, but you're probably deploying the 4 longbowmen together. You could spin a couple of them off and send them off to really give you a massive amount of shooting on one flank, and use it as a 3 and 2. You could even drive it down a flank, and there's not much mounted. It's getting past 5 longbowmen and a foot knight either way. And once they pick up the stakes again, they're still moving 3. They can get back into the middle quite quickly. The third command is pretty much the same. A slight difference, basically just shaving a few points off by having effectively the same command, but instead of 4 longbowmen, it's got 3 and a slightly cheaper crossbowman. Really, just otherwise it would be 18, which does start to completely scare me. So this was saying, but it does rely on getting your stakes down at the right time and getting them up at the right time, and getting some bits and pieces of terrain scattered around. And each time you're looking at those groups of 4 longbowmen or 3 longbowmen and a crossbowman to put out enough firepower that it does blunt anybody else's attack, and it does scare off anybody else's mounted. And in this period, or in this small period, you get the stakes down, the French are a bit stuck, to be honest. So it's a much more sort of textbook typical one, but that's kind of how it works. So what are your thoughts? Look, it's trying to be historical, but I still sit here scratching my head thinking, is it usable?
I think there's a couple of other comments to add. One, particularly commands 2 and 3, you've got the choice of either grouping the archers, or you could actually use them as a kind of early Renaissance heavy foot with 2 firing wings, which I think there's some evidence that the English deployed like that. Mixing the crossbowmen in is particularly effective, because if you are facing enemy foot knights, there's still only protection of one against the crossbow.
Yeah, and you let the crossbowman take the lead on shooting.
Exactly. And with then the longbowmen in support. So that means even the foot knights aren't completely safe if you can concentrate your fire on them, because it does take them time to grind forward. So
and moving them in little groups of two, they have that ability to manage who they're shooting at quite easily.
Yes, the disadvantage is as soon as the bowmen aren't in a group, you're spending more points to deploy the stakes.
Yeah.
So that's what you've got to weigh up, and I think it'll depend upon your opponent whether you think you're very likely to use the stakes, because you may end up never deploying the stakes.
It's a threat.
I think the thing that really neutralizes elite longbow is light infantry. And I think what you find in this period is, there are a few armies like Albanians or whatever, but so many armies, people only take 2 or 3 light foot.
Yeah.
And if an elite longbow is firing at any heavy troops, it's amazing the factors. You're shooting at spearmen on a 0, but you're elite. So, you can very quickly pile on the pressure on an opponent.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And again, particularly if we're looking in this mini period, you look down that French list and there's 2 light infantry. That's it. That's all they're allowed. So
yes.
Those 2 light infantry are going to struggle to stand in front of, whatever this is, 10 longbowmen and 2 crossbowmen, aren't they? They're going to have to be doing a bit of dodgeball left, right and centre to catch all those arrows before it hits their heavy foot.
And if they dismount, then they're slower and the longbow can just back up out of the way.
Yeah. Dave, what's your thought?
I think you're going to you're going to go for a defending in forest here, aren't you?
Yeah.
No.
Well, I'm not sure, but probably not forest actually. I think plains just gives you much more opportunity of fields, because once you get into forests and plantations, you're taking -1 for shooting out of them, which isn't as good. So you really want, your brush, your scrub, your fields to get these longbowmen just marching through and making it very obvious where other people have got to funnel stuff through, and perhaps you're not even opposing it in a way.
In the army, you need to cut down the amount of terrain as possible.
Yeah.
And forest, and then if you were going forest, I would then try and sneak the 2 elite lightfoot javelin in, just to sort of give you some sort of terrain troops. But that's my feel on that.
Yeah, but I wonder if if you're trying to do that, you're trying to get around the flanks of a different army and break it up, and actually you want people to think, oh sod it, I'll have a go at the longbowmen. In a way, you want to make them look vulnerable. In some ways, having the crossbowmen in that group of 4 and having one without the stakes who's not elite makes them perhaps look vulnerable enough to try and have a go at in some strange way.
I think the other comment I said, Richard's comment about if you have 2 archers together and they can maneuver themselves so they're picking on one target, rather, what you want is, you don't want a row of archers all shooting at their own individual target. What you want is 2 archers ganging up together and fire. So if you've got a knight in the open and you can get 2 longbowmen shooting at him, you've got +1 for shooting mounted, +1 for a mate, and you're a longbow. You're going to knock that knight down very, very quickly. And then when that knight comes in, you're actually getting to a point where it's an evens fight.
Yeah, and I guess that's that's sort of the micro version of that sweeping arc of longbowmen that the French so obligingly charged into so many times as well.
Moving around there's 2 options with bowmen, longbowmen, whichever bowman. Gang them up in a big group where they should kick out a lot of shooting, or split them up into penny packets where 2 of them operate together.
Yeah,
so that's a really good trick.
Yeah, there's some more options with it. For sure. Okay then. Well, look, that's 3 of the English. Let's move on and have a look at the French.
This means war.
Okay then. Well, look, we've covered the English. Always best to do the winners first, I guess. Oh no, I suppose by the end of it, they weren't the winners, were they? but both sides get to win. What a great campaign. But let's look at the French, which on the paper, on the surface of it, is an army with a lot more options to it. It doesn't draw your eye to you're supposed to be using longbow, and it's got some very good quality mounted units, but it's thinking about fighting an opponent who's optimized to deal with that, which does present kind of an unusual challenge in drawing up a list. But Dave, let's have a look at yours first. You've got a 1429 list with I can see you've actually put some proper generals in. You've even gone proper full-on strategist, Joan of Arc, I imagine. Yep, there she is. And you've got a 13, a 5, and a teeny tiny 4 there in your 22 unit initiative 2 1429 100 Years War French army. So, did you enjoy doing this one more? Was there more toys to choose from? Did you? Because of that, do you feel it's a better list, or is it still as hamstrung as some of the others?
Well, this one actually took to a competition. We had a one-day competition in central London. Okay. And I designed it because I thought I want to use Jeanne d'Arc.
Yeah.
I'd actually played Tommy from Ireland in the competition, and he'd brought foot knights, which I kind of dismissed in the past. And I thought, I want to copy that and have a go with it. So I came up with this list in that sort of instance, and it came a cropper as soon as it got hit by mounted knights. In fact, 5 mounted knights ran straight over my foot knights, which was a bit of a shock. But I thought I'd found some tricks for that. So against the mounted, it wasn't good. But I think it's a fun army. I think it's fairly accurate for the historical period and things.
Is it kind of been designed thinking about the English army as an opponent in mind? Is there a bit of that, or is it just a more generic one?
It's trying to be sort of generic, but the one thing I was actually trying to think about fighting mounted.
Okay.
But that didn't work at all. In the first command, you see there's a light artillery, and my idea was the light artillery sits in the line with the foot knights, and any knights that come close, you go up and try and shoot them down. But that just didn't work at all. Light artillery didn't work at all. Didn't work.
Well, look, run us through. Talk us through what's in each command line by line, then, and then we'll have a look at it.
Sure. I mean, so the third corps 3 is 2 heavy cavalry impacts and 2 crossbowmen. Mediocre. That's the standard micro command. That can go down first to try and get a look at where the opponents are, or it can go into an ambush, or it can go into a flank march, or it can do one of the above to try and make the enemy think what's going on. Again, because I've got a strategist, I've got 3 opportunities for an ambush. You want to put all 3 ambushes down to sort of make your opponent think about what's going on. And that, the idea is to make the enemy, put the enemy on the sort of back foot as much as you can.
Okay.
The second command is to hold a flank as much as anything, because you've got some crossbowmen there, you've got a couple of knights on foot, and you've got a heavy knight's impact, which, as Richard said in the last comment, you can sit him behind the line just to threaten. Keep to be able to pull out and fill a hole or spring out from behind and use its more maneuverability to.
So two knights on foot are solid. 2 crossbowmen gives you decent shooting, and the heavy knight either makes it 5 wide, and you've got paper, scissors, and stone in there. None of them are massive, but there's just a little bit of everything, isn't there?
Exactly, and the crossbowman with the Pavese is going to be doing the shooting with the mediocre guy helping him. And the knight is there to almost protect. He can operate to protect the crossbowman if he can as well. Then you've got the main force, with Jeanne d'Arc is a strategist, and the idea of this was that she's going to be using her strategy points to try and rally up troops in combat. That was the thinking behind this. You've got a couple of levies sit behind the line to plug holes. You've got 2 crossbowmen again to sit on a flank. Again, one with a Pavese, he's fairly bulletproof, with a mediocre friend to help him with shooting. And then it's the foot knights that are going to do the fighting, along with a heavy swordsman, 2-handed weapon. You've got a light foot to protect things and add shooting somewhere. And I've never used a light artillery, so the idea was to try and see what that did, and it didn't do very much at all.
Didn't do much. So yeah, five foot knights, 2 of them elite, is pretty solid, and then adding another couple of heavy swordsmen with 200 weapon gives you, a 7 combat frontage of 200 weapons, which I think, Richard, your spear heavy English army is not going to be massively happy about that, I'd imagine. But
no, I mean, to me, this army is going to be brilliant against any foot army and probably most cavalry armies, but its weakness is it doesn't have much of a response to mounted knights, because it doesn't really have the firepower to stop them, and it doesn't have the spearmen or the pikemen to hold them off. And as Dave said, that's its Achilles heel. But other than that, it's got a lot going for it, and no army is great against everyone. So.
I completely concur with that. I mean, my idea was with the first command is that you normally face enemies with 4 elite knights. That's the usual sort of command. So I was thinking, right, okay, I'm at least 6 or 7 wide, and I'm trying to negate his ability, his impact ability, by having a bit more width. And if he does break through, I'll try and plug the hole with levy. And also, I was also trying to think, I'll almost sacrifice the light artillery in the line to a knight to try and beat the other knights coming through. So, but
but paying or eking out somewhere the extra 4 points to make that light infantry into a heavy could make quite a difference. Because I find heavy, you do still shoot quite a long way, and there's such a big psychological barrier for other people. But is this an army that goes forwards too much to really use that? I don't know. Initiative 2. Are you thinking about moving this forwards, or?
The light artillery shoots at 4.
Yeah.
So you're trying to sort of get one shot in, pop a knight to give your foot knights a bit more of an advantage. That was the idea.
Theory.
And as I say, you're almost going to sacrifice that light artillery to the knight. All right, it will go straight through and pop out the other side, but you're going to, try and hold it. I'm just trying to give my foot knights more ability to win against the mounted. Was the theory about that. And then if I'm fighting another foot knight army, I think I'm pretty damn strong.
Yeah, quite possibly. Certainly against another foot knight army, you'd be very strong. Richard, what's your thoughts on that one?
No, I think, as I've said, I mean, it's got quite a long line. There's a nice mix. The heavy cavalry impact isn't that great head on against knights, but against a lot of other things, it'll give them a hard time. It's a nice little flank march command. But as I say, even in a medieval period where you might face a lot of medium or heavy knights, I would worry about its ability to stop. Even a few. I think, but in this later version, you can't have any spearmen. But I think at the end of the day, that. So if you're facing a mounted knight army, you just have to deploy very defensively.
And put down the terrain.
And put down the terrain, yeah.
Yeah, just hide. Okay, all right, interesting one. Well, let's flick on and have a look at the next one.
This means war.
So, Richard, this is your French army. You've picked another reasonably early date. You've gone before that sort of 1400 option, which means I'm 1367. So as I'm looking at this, I'm probably looking for those spears. And yep, there they are. You've also got 22. Your initiative's a stellar 1 here that you've achieved through 2 competent generals spread out in your 10. It says 4, but I think it might be 5 because there's 5 troops in it. That might be an error on the spreadsheet, and 8, which possibly means it's 23.
Yes.
If those maths are correct, and 23, not 22. Weird spreadsheet error there. But so talk us through through this and how you put this together and how you see this fighting?
So this is an army kind of designed for an in-period battle against the English. The thing I like about the Pavese is that it comes into effect after the normal missile adjustment. So it gives your heavy spearmen a protection of 1 against longbow and 2 against crossbow, which means that it really toughens you up against their shooting, or if you were facing Huns or Mongols or somebody against mounted shooting. It's got enough foot knights with them to be able to inflict pain on the enemy. So and then enough shooting to stop somebody just hanging around in front of you being annoying. So I think the idea, you'd put command 2 in the center. That's 5 heavy foot. Depending on where the rough terrain fell, commands 1 and 3 would either put their heavy foot next to it or their shooting next to it. If it was one massive line of heavy foot, then the 3 crossbow on each end would be there to hold off enemy mounted, or to lap round and bring fire to bear to shoot in the long line of heavy foot.
Yeah, because you've got 11. Is it 11 heavy foot there? You've got 5 in that central command, 3 knights on foot, 2 heavy spearmen, and then it looks like 2 knights on foot and a heavy spearman, again all with Pavese in either flank command. So
yes,
that's quite a big frontage, isn't it? Of quite tough old stuff.
It is, and you've got the 2 heavy knights on the flanks, which can either extend that line or be a flank or hold for breakthroughs. And then, you've got 4 troops in each flank, or 5 in the first command, able to go in. The Genoese elite crossbowman is also quite nice for softening up heavy foot knights, or is quite intimidating to enemy mounted knights. Again, that Pavese just means if you're facing longbow, they're not complete fodder. So that was really the concept of it. And I think, I think there's only 1 light infantry. So actually, as you say, just correct the spreadsheet error. And I think there's 23 units, of which 22 can go in the battle line. So I think that's quite tasty.
Yeah, that's almost kind of a, as you say, it matches up against the English because, well, you've got a central that's all combat troops, that 5, but the other ones are kind of 3 heavy foot who go in and fight, and 3 shooting troops, crossbow Pavese elite. So you are using those all arms formations of 3 shooters, 3 combat infantry, and then a heavy knight impact as kind of a reserve, or a having a second go at paper, scissors, stone, depending on what you're fighting as well. And you've still got quite a lot of the French nobility there. You've got the 4 or 5. Well, you got 7 of them as well. So you are using the French nobility, but by this time they've clearly learnt to get off their horses and start marching towards the sounds of the longbows. Now, Dave, what's your thoughts looking at this one?
I like the idea of the crossbow Pavese elite. I think that's a really interesting troop type. I think those crossbow working together are going to be quite powerful. And the only danger is the mediocre guy, but you've just got to keep him out of the way. He's just going there to add on the shooting. And I do also like having 1 mounted knight working behind the line, or just as a reserve, is a very good thing to. So I think it's very balanced, and we've got 23 bases, and we've actually this time managed to have 2 generals who are not completely included and things like that. So
really competent.
This is going to have a little bit of advantage on some things, although other things may just grind straight through the centre. But it's difficult, isn't it?
Interesting.
This means war.
All right, well, look, let's flick on and look at the third one then. 100 Years' War French. I've gone a bit later still, 1399. And again, this awesome initiative of one achieved by cobbling together a couple of competent generals. But this is picking up the coin and flicking it over. And I think, Richard, where you've got heads, I'm going tails with this one. And this is just saying, actually, sometimes with these armies, when you get, when you look down the list and you get a gift of 12 of the best knights possible, that's a way to use it. And having a lot of knights, having that many, all elite, if you so wish, knights in an army is such a rare thing that there is a strategy of saying, do what the French did and go big on what the army list is just very good at. And it's a great army for socializing in the bar, because you're going to maximize the red wine drinking time, or the cider, depending if you're from parts of Normandy or something like that. But this is, it's literally looking at it going, they're good at that, let's just double down on that, really. So it's a 20, 6, a 9 and a 5. So the two smaller commands are pretty straightforward. You've got 4 impetuous heavy knights elite, a couple of light infantry crossbow to screen them possibly, and an ordinary included unreliable general. But that's 4 impetuous elite knights, and you're going to have to deal with that. It becomes not my problem quite quickly. The other one is a more sophisticated version of that, barely more sophisticated. It's 2 impetuous heavy knights elite, couple of 1 valet, which is the heavy cavalry impact. So the 2 knights can scare a lot of people off, but that heavy cavalry is okay, but it gives you an extra thing. It can get around a flank, and a couple of light infantry javelin elite, the B-days, who can either screen or, as we've said before, in this kind of mini theme, they're still pretty good in rough terrain. The 2 of them are going to have a staring match with your mediocre swordsman, I think, at some point. And then the monstrous competent general 9 strong central command. And I say central, but it's still pretty similar. I'm taking 3 elite impetuous knights and 2 more non-impetuous knights. That's just a points thing. But I've included the general. So across the army, you've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You've got 11 of the 12 impetuous knights, which you're just hurling at someone. This is a block of 5. The textbook for all of us, the crossbowman mediocre and the elite crossbowman pervice, operating to shoot them in and give them a little bit of extra support. The 2 mediocre swordsmen who lurk in the rough terrain, possibly ganging up with the light infantry javelin as well, but they're sort of padding, because this is just all about picking a place to put 12 impetuous heavy knights, 11 impetuous heavy knights, 9 of which are elite, 2 of which have got included generals, and rolling the dice and overwhelming people. And as long as the army bears very careful attention to the weather forecast and has an awareness of the impact of rough terrain on mounted troops attacking longbowmen with stakes, it's going to be doing what it does. And you're you are sort of committing it to the dice, but you're stacking up the odds pretty much as well as you can with all those elites and all those embedded generals.
Yeah, I think certainly it's going to be a fun army to play, and getting your deployment right. Because the thing about those kind of armies is they're very hard to redeploy. But I think you just have to make a plan. And even if the odds don't favour you, stick to your plan, charge in, and hope that the elite and all the heavy armour and so on win you the day. As you say, it's hard to argue with. It's and it moves fast enough and strikes hard enough that even if an enemy overlaps you on the flanks, that they may not have long enough to actually hurt you. You may have broken through by the time they're in a position to exploit that.
Yeah, I think this would have a go at even at the centre of most of these armies. I think even going back all the way to the first one with the Low Countries, those four mediocre spearmen are probably the thing that they shy away from. Sorry, mediocre pikemen. It's probably what they'd shy away from. But most of the rest of the stuff, because of the heavy armour, and because they're all impetuous, so you've actually got no choice. So you might as well rationalise to yourself that it's a sensible option. You just charge at it anyway and give it a go and roll the dice. And this feels like the flower of French nobility. This is the way to do the army, and hope that they just get a better weather forecast than they did in the three historical battles, to see if they get a different outcome. Dave, what do you think of it?
I think it just does what it says on the tin. It's a French knight army. I played a medieval game last night with Simon Ray Mayer. He took feudal English. I think he had 9 knights in total, but you've got more here. And, if you put Command 1 and Command 2 together, where you've got 4, 7, 9 knights rolling down the table, that's going to be more than anything can really withstand, as long as it's in the open. You've got enough medium foot to sit and occupy the wings, enough to give enough time for the knights to do their thing and hopefully win you the game. You may have to mark a piece of terrain at some point with a knight or two. If you've got a piece of terrain which is problematic, what you're going to have to do is keep a knight just outside his shooting distance, but prevent any opponent's troops coming out of that terrain whilst you shoot into it with your crossbowmen, just to occupy that whilst the rest of it. You're going to fight in plains, I assume, and just take a tiny little field and a road. Yeah,
no, you want this kind of, pretty bald or possibly one lump of terrain. So you don't want the enemy to be able to squirt out the way completely. Yeah. You want to have a good idea, but you also want to stretch their heavy infantry line a little bit, so that you can start to force yourself into fighting against their mounted and their knights. So very simple. I wouldn't say idiot proof, because I'm sure I could have a go at disproving that theory, but it does what it says on the tin.
What really messes up this kind of army is if the opponent manages to get a large piece of terrain roughly in the center, so that the knights have to charge past it, and that you can threaten the flanks of a group of 4 or 5 knights as they go past. You can't stop 11 knights, but if the enemy can use terrain to break you up into smaller packets, that's when you get into trouble with this kind of army.
Yeah, no, I've struggled with that. I think using my Hungarians online recently as well, and I think somebody had a Swiss ally, and they that group of halberdiers sat in terrain right down the middle. I think back in DBM days, it used to be called a bow motorway, didn't it? That extended straight down the middle of the table that your bowmen would just march down. But I suppose here, having thought about that and learning it, you're probably just feeding that terrain, the 2 mediocre swordsmen and the 2 crossbowmen to an extent, and kind of expecting that they're going to lose. But if they occupy and stop stuff leaping out of the terrain, the knights are past it, and you've just got to accept those 3-4 units as attrition, and hope that the rest of the army doesn't concede 20 hits before it rolls over something. The clock is ticking on it, and that's what it's got to do.
I think when we began playing, we were all going with heavy knight armies, and we kind of dismissed them over time, because we sort of realised that there's a lot more subtlety to the game than we thought. And then I remember Dan took to the Worlds an incredibly large French impetuous knight army and did very, very well with it. And you have to sort of examine it again after that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's different paper, scissors, stone. I think if you've got into a habit of expecting everybody to turn up with clever, combined arms armies, and then someone does turn up with a one-dimensional thing. Again, the first time we all went to Charleroi for the Worlds, and I had a horrendous time against an Italian lad with that Scots army, and which I'd never seen before, that had 15 mediocre pikemen that it just threw at me, and I couldn't deal with that at all. It was like, why didn't we all thought of these one-dimensional armies? We're all trying to be clever. So I think there is that element of surprise, and actually I'm slightly sort of surprised there's so many different ways of pulling these two lists together. I think with the English, you get drawn to the longbow because that's the iconic thing. And I think with the French, you get drawn to the knights because that's the iconic thing. But as we said at the start, there's a lot of earlier, smaller battles and chevauchée, was it? You know, the big mounted raids and things which went on outside the 3 battles in 100 years. And these lists are actually quite good for simulating those on a pretty small scale, really. You know, the scalability of the rule set means that some of these small bands of 20, 40 knights and a couple of hundred spearmen and some crossbowmen, and you can be recreating that as much as you can be recreating Crecy, Poitiers, you know, the big 3 battles. So it's kind of been an interesting exercise, actually.
As always, I think it shows that every list, if you focus on one list at a time, it's amazing what you find.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Well, look, let's move on and have a look at some of the figures.
This means war. This means war.
Well, look, we've covered 6 army lists there, 3 of each, and possibly found something quite decent for it. The way that we normally wrap these up is to have a quick chat of about the figures for it. And I don't know, are these armies that you guys have collected? Is it one we talked about it as being a classic list? I think I've sort of collected it, but as part of a more generic medieval piece. But are these armies that you own?
A bit the same. I've got a whole mix of late medieval figures that I sometimes use as these armies, but I've also used as German and condottieri.
I've got a lot of longbow from a Fog AM army. In Fog, the 100 Years War English was quite good. You could use the longbowmen as a sort of like miniature Sherman tank running around in groups of 4s or 6s or something. So I've got a whole drawer full of longbowmen. So I've got the longbowmen, and I built up a Donington army from having Donington's longbow. Very, very pretty. And
yeah, they produced that. That's one of their first new era ranges, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, they were very, very good with the padded jackets and the things. So I really like them. So my basic medievals are all Donington. They do a very nice French knights dying.
Right. I think they also do a Joan of Arc figure, although
I've got the Joan of Arc figure. That's one of the intrigue with the banner. And Damien's banners are very, very nice. I really like his banners. His banner sheets are researched. They give you all the sort of explanation. They explain who's who in the army. So I bought the Jeanne d'Arc banner, and I've got a Jeanne d'Arc figure. Because that, you know, I actually built the list we did in this with I thought I've never used a foot knight army. Let's have Jeanne d'Arc as a strategist. Let's put some artillery. Let's put some really strange toys into it and see where we get to. And I really
are the you know, is it fair to say that the mounted and the foot knights here are or should be noticeably different from generic late medieval knights and dismounts, or is it once they get dismounted they look all pretty much the same all the way up to the end of the period in 15mm with black undercoat and some dry brush? I think
it depends how much of a purist you are. In that, if you are a purist, the Poitiers Crecy era, the mid 14th century, have the heraldic jupons, you know, which are they're the tight-fitting heraldry over their armour, rather than the looser 13th century surcoats. Whereas as you move into the 15th century, everybody just tends to be in bare metal.
Right. Okay.
And so it's much easier in the 15th century. You know, anybody, you can be anything. But really, you know, if you're doing Poitiers or Crecy, you should paint up all the heraldry on the figures.
But in terms of figures, though, it's the difference between flowing robes, but these should be much more, the heraldry should be painted almost straight onto the figure's chest, if you like. It was just tight fitting stuff.
Exactly. It's just a tight surcoat actually that actually fits over the armor. And the difference as well is in the 14th century, you tend to have more of the pointed bassinet with the raisable visor, whereas as you go into the 15th century, you get more of the sallet type with the single sort of Cylon Raider slit.
Should have a light behind it going backwards and forwards or something like that, like Kit from Knight Rider or something. Yeah. No, I think I've got that, quite a lot of those Donington figures, and they've got a lot of different variety in it. I think that's the ones where the mounted figures come with separate lances, and they have a little plate that slides down the lance to be the kind of the
man brace.
The man brace that comes as a separate one. But then I also mix in a load of the really quite nice museum dismounted knights and things like that.
Yes.
Is it reasonable with this one? Because I think, again, I've got some longbowmen who are they're Old Glory's. Old Glory's got kind of a sub brand for their medieval stuff. I can't remember what it's called. Is it called Battle Honours or something? There's a sort of 15mm sub brand that's not normal Old Glory that I've got some, but they're in the heraldry. They don't have those ribbed, padded tops. And looking at the 25mm figures, where I guess it's very hard to look past the Perry box set of plastics, they do that late medieval archers and mercenaries as a set, and longbowmen for the War of the Roses, but then they also do a separate one for the 100 Years' War with all the ribbed kind of puffer jacket stuff. Was that sort of puffer jacket thing for this whole period, or would they have gone towards the more heraldry, one side red, one side blue, that sort of thing over the top of it by the end of this period? Do we reckon?
That really is getting into the 1450s and the War of the Roses,
right,
with the livery on it, and just a straight sort of quilted accaton is more 14th century. What you tend to see as you go through time is that the longbowmen start wearing more armor. So there's quite a lot of images with people as they capture stuff off the French. Right, the longbowmen start wearing it. So you see them in mail jackets, in mail hoods, in even plate armor on their legs. Wow. As long as the body can move. Yeah. So one of the tricky things, again, they're already expensive, so why would you make them armored? But when you look at some of the pictures, these guys are what would qualify as a medium knight in terms of the kit they're wearing.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a question. Was we all sit here and speculate at the time we're recording this, we're probably a few months away from seeing version 4. I wonder if there's a theory that there's a scope to do longbowmen slightly differently, because there's always that question about should they have melee capability or should they have armor, or does that just stop them working because they're too expensive? Is there any tweaks that would make longbowmen work more like longbowmen?
I think it's fairly good as it is. They clearly weren't hand-to-hand experts the way Janissaries were. Yeah. But clearly they were perfectly happy once the knights were knocked over to go up and stick a sword in their in their visor, or to capture them. Yeah. And I think simply by being elite, they, if you put an elite longbowman in hand-to-hand combat with a medium swordsman, they will win 40% of the time. Yeah.
Especially if they've damaged the other guy on the way in.
And if they've damaged the guy on the way in, they will win 60% of the time.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's then it's just that inability to actually charge opponents. Maybe they can bowmen charge damaged opponents though? I'm trying to remember the rules here. I think they can.
Certainly can in the flank. I'm not sure about frontally.
They can charge other bowmen who are disordered frontally.
Or something.
Okay. But it's also, they can also charge if the enemy's an overlap. So one of the tricky
Yeah.
things by having the medium swordsman, even if it's mediocre, you put him in, and then all your bowmen can go in.
Just can all pile in as well to support him. Okay, so that does work in that combined arms thing then. All right, and then I guess the other one in terms of figures, there's obviously the new plastic version of the Corvus Belli range, which is, it's kind of a cute range. They've got they're nice figures, but with that wash of cuteness that maybe the Donington ones are a bit more, real person-y. But there's a cute dimension to the Corvus Belli ones, and in fact, I think I've cooked up a list using that specific box set to see if there's something there that can be done. I'll see if I can.
Why don't you look for those?
I'll see if I
just
throw
want
that
to
on
plug.
screen. Yeah. Who else?
Plug in for Essex, because I
Okay.
think this is one of the periods where I really like their figures. Particularly you perhaps don't necessarily need all the animation for a heavy knight on a horse.
True.
And I have a lot of theirs, and they are a bit vanilla, but I think I really like them for this period.
Yeah, I think
I agree with that. I think the Essex, I did an Essex Hussite army with Essex, and the foot knights, even the mounted knights, they can be a bit splayed out with their arms out wide and things, and the lancers can be a bit chunky. But I think the foot knights are really nice. And
I think a lot of this is about painting, certainly on the longbow side of it, is about getting a good sort of two-tone, dark and light sort of stripes to paint the vertical ribbed jackets and getting that effect. But I think Essex, their bowmen do have quite a mix of people who start to have some of the armour as well. So you can get some good mix in from the bowmen, and you're cramming quite a few on a base. I guess with ADLG, where you're doing square bases as well, 40 by 40, you get away from having to have two exact ranks as well.
Yes.
Which if you're, you can put them in a mass behind some stakes or something and space them all irregularly. And those Essex ones are quite slim. So when they're in their firing position, you can fit them staggered at quite a lot of different ways on the bases next to each other and get that real sense of a mass of bowmen. I think you could probably fit 10, I guess, if you really wanted to go for it and create the impression of a real solid line of people there with those Essex figures.
I think having them offset really makes them look much more realistic. Yeah, I really like that. It's one of the things I love about ADLG, really.
With medievals, it's so good to put in loads and loads of banners as well. A medieval army would have a lot of banners, and that can make an army look really pretty.
Yeah, because I think the here we go. Here's the list I found. So the that Corvus Belli set, according to what's on the PSC website, it's pretty heavily geared to a different rule set, obviously, and that means there's an awful lot of longbowmen and an awful lot of foot sort of halberdier billmen, and it's a bit difficult to see from the description what exactly you've actually got there, because the troop types don't kind of match, and there's almost no mounted. And I think we've all thought, you do need the light infantry or the two hobelars to give you a bit of paper, scissors, stone, or possibly the couple of the knights or something. But so this is literally for, I think it used to be 35 quid. It's now gone up to 40 quid. Their box set, not a great list, but it is 40 quid, which is about, I think it'd be about 52 if you bought it from Essex or something. So it's only about a tenner difference. But so this would be a command you can cobble together, and you've got stick the strategist in. That's partly just to get the points up, because you sort of need to do it. 2 foot knights, a halberdier, and 4 longbowmen in your first shooting and mixed command. A foot knight, 2 foot knights, a halberdier, and 3 longbowmen in your next command, with a competent included general, and then 2 spearmen who could be billmen, I guess, with armor, and a couple of longbowmen. So you're using 11 longbowmen there. Is it 11? No, sorry. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 longbowmen, because I think there's nearly 54 in the packet. or officially to do it, which it's not a great list. I think you'd probably end up spending the 25% discount on metal figures on extra figures to make it into a proper list anyway, and you'd get some wastage on the longbowmen and possibly the halberdiers, but there's something there. And I think again, it's got way too much command just to soak up points, because there's just not quite 200 points there. But this was more an exercise in perhaps give the longbowmen stakes and drop some of the command points there if you only had this set of figures to play with. I don't know how bad a list is this really if you guys are looking at it.
It's pretty weak because it's only 17. Yeah. I like the Corvus Belli figures.
Yeah.
I remember looking at them years ago for my medievals, and the halberdier is a really nice figure, as are the longbowmen. As you say, the only weakness is you don't have quite enough of the range to bring in the light foots and some other bits and pieces. The knights look a bit odd, I think. From what I remember, but the halberdiers, I really like them.
Yeah, I suppose it's finding troops that if you really want to go for the same style, troops that match those slightly cartoonish style. But there's the bones of a list there, but because there's too many longbowmen probably in the packet for us, and then you end up needing to buy extras anyway. So that pricing difference isn't quite as much as it is, but it's an interesting option if anybody wants to kick off and get started with this one, I guess.
And keep army.
Yeah, and a good start on the army.
This means war. This means war.
Okay, well, I think that's rattled through all of those then. And I think, Richard, you said earlier, the more you stare at a list, the better it is, or the better chance you have of actually finding something half decent in it. And I think we all probably started this one thinking these are all a bit rubbish. I'm not sure if we managed to convince ourselves that we might think about using some of these yet. But
the French one, I would. I mean, I've seen Hubert use them a lot, and I've found it very hard. I mean, I find it hard to beat him anyway, but he plays the French a lot, both mounted and dismounted. And he's really got some good ideas on how to use them. The English, I just think the War of the Roses version tends to be better.
Yeah.
You don't get the German ally, but you get some cheaper versions of the troops. And you just get, I just feel happier, I think, looking at that.
Yeah.
And if you're going with Perry, I think it's easier to do the figures and morph them to other things. So
they fit.
I would be more tempted to go to do a 1450 army rather than a 1415 army.
Yeah, I think do that Joan of Arc army again. I think that's quite. There's something in that army as long as you don't get ridden down by mounted knights.
Yeah. And I think with the Perry stuff, the way I'd approach it is I'd just use the Wars of the Roses longbowmen anyway, and plonk them on table for this and hope that no one notices or complains.
I don't.
It's like
most of the people we play don't have enough history to know those finer points.
Well, to be honest, neither did I before we started this conversation. So I think
I certainly don't care.
No,
I certainly don't care. Yeah. I mean, if somebody uses something completely outrageous, I get a bit sniffy.
Yeah, but having two different
using
sets,
an elephant to be a knight, but other than that,
but having two different sets of longbowmen for because they wore their jackets in a slightly different way 50 years apart is probably going a step too far, even for our extensive and aggressive purchasing campaign. Yes, indeed. And on that note, we will love you all and leave you. So goodbye from all of us. Thank you.